everyone. Welcome to this Tech Talk. I'm Hyunjin Kim. I'm a professor here at INSEAD in the strategy area. And today's webinar is part of a series of talks that we've been doing on digital technologies and the impact that they have on business. We've been featuring leading technologists, thought leaders, practitioners, and academics to cover a wide spectrum of issues. And if you'd like more information on these talks that we're going to have in the future, or if you would like to take a look at some of the past talks and the recordings, please check out Digital at INSEAD. Now, to get on with today's program, we have a great webinar on digital transformation with a fantastic set of speakers to share their insights. We have Dominik Krimpmann, who is a managing director at Accenture, specializing in technology strategy, and Sebastian Drews, who is the chief information officer at Suse, the world's largest independent open source software company. All right. So I want to begin our conversation today by talking about, what do we mean by digital transformation? And let's start by, engaging together right off the bat. So let me just start by asking all of you, let's see, I think actually, Sandra, I think the questions are flipped here. The first question that we wanted to ask is, first, have you invested in digital transformation in your company? Where are you in your digital transformation journey? So that we can get a sense of, who's joining here and where you are in this experience. All right, Sandra, when the results are ready, when we have enough responses. Okay, great. So I think you all can't see this, but to give you a sense of who we have here, we have all of the INSEAD community from across the world, and about 43% of you say that your company has already invested deeply in digital transformation, and 41% has just started to invest in digital transformation. 11% of you say that your company is considering whether or how to invest in digital transformation. And then 5% say that you haven't yet invested in digital transformation. So that's really great in terms of the audience that we're speaking to. It sounds like many of you are already very much on the journey of starting to invest. Now, let's do a follow-up to that. A lot of your companies have really started investing in digital transformation. So what does digital transformation mean to you? In your opinion, what best describes the effort that you have begun? Okay, great. Can we see the results if most of the responses are in? All right. So we see quite a lot of differences in terms of what best describes digital transformation here. As you can see, hopefully on the screen, for those of you that are tuning in now, about 20% are saying this is really about digitizing business processes, moving things from paper to online, etc. Some of you say that this is about adopting certain technologies like data analytics and artificial intelligence. For some of you, this really means connecting better with digital customers. And then many of you say that this is about, completely rethinking the way that we do business. And some of you also say that this is about organizational or cultural shifts. Now, I wanted to start with this to kick off our webinar today, because I think that, when we talk about digital transformation, this is one of those terms that has become really ubiquitous today. When we talk about, what this means, and even just doing a really quick search of what are some of the recent articles on digital transformation. In fact, I think the use of this term has really accelerated throughout the pandemic. And yet, this doesn't really have a clear definition. It means different things across different businesses, across different industries. As all of you have shown, it means that, sometimes we're really thinking about digitizing all of our processes, or really adopting different technologies, or the kinds of customer interactions that we might have. And all of these are fairly big, profound challenges, right? So we would expect pretty large returns. Either we're talking about, making our processes efficient by moving the things that we did offline to online, or digitizing some of the processes that might have been on paper to different interfaces. We're also talking about adopting pretty sophisticated automation and predictive analytics technologies, and opening up new customer channels. And yet, the returns to digital transformation have been relatively low. With few companies, even the ones that are investing significantly in it, seeing some of these gains materialize. And there are a bunch of different stats that we could walk through here. So let me just throw up one of my favorites. This is from a 2019 survey that was done by the MIT Sloan Management Review, along with BCG, across over 2,500 executives. And this one focused specifically on technologies or initiatives that were related to artificial intelligence, which is, of course, one possible aspect of a digital transformation. But this is one that is both quite costly and that often represents dramatic changes across the organization. And here, 7 out of 10 companies reported minimal or no impact. And even among those that said that they made significant investments, more than 40% didn't report any gains. Now, why is this the case? Well, of course, there are many reasons for this, not the least of which is that digital transformation efforts mean different things. And of course, I think one of the questions that are coming up here is this question that, or comment that digitization and digitalization are not always the same. Although, of course, they can actually be very much intermingled in the sense that digitization may be talking about really moving these paper-based processes to online, or making some of these processes efficient by using some of the digital technologies. Whereas digitalization is really referring to the use of digital technologies to change the way that we do business, but the boundaries actually between them are not always very clear. And I just have to break the bad news to you first, which is that we'll only really get to the tip of the iceberg today in terms of why a lot of companies don't seem to be seeing the returns to their digital transformation efforts. Now, one key part of the challenge, of course, is measurement and how long these impacts might take to manifest. And this is something that we're really going to get into in our panel discussion. So let me save it for then to dive in really deeper into this issue. The other part is that a lot of these digital transformation efforts often fail. So in my research, I work closely in collaboration with companies to understand some of the challenges that they face in digital transformation. We have weekly meetings. We work together to collect the data and construct measures across the organization and run experiments across the business. And in my recent work, I focused on why and how companies might fail to realize the gains from using data and algorithms to inform their strategic decision-making, which is, of course, only one piece of a digital transformation effort, but provides some insights about why this might be so challenging. And I want to first share 3 takeaways from some of my recent work to hopefully help frame the panel discussion that we're going to have. Now, the first is that when it comes to collecting and leveraging data within the organization to inform decisions, a lot of companies try to do everything. And there's, I think, this assumption often that you need to collect a ton of data, use the most sophisticated models. And this can often complicate or delay or derail efforts. And in a lot of instances, what we find is that even simple data can get you actually quite far. So in a research project with a few co-authors from HBS, we compare the extent to which technical sophistication, both in terms of the amount of data and algorithmic sophistication when using algorithm-based technologies to improve decision-making, improves resource allocation decisions within an organization. And what we find is that actually much of the gains stem from integrating any data into the processes rather than more data or algorithmic sophistication in many managerial contexts. Second, a key reason why organizations might fail to realize gains from even easily available data or certain adoptions of digital technologies is that this is often seen as a one-time adoption decision, and they fail to continue to pay attention. So in a study that I conducted with Yelp across thousands of retail businesses, we found that many of them failed to improve their decisions from even easily available competitor data, simply because they collected some of this information at some point and invested in understanding it. And this leads them to believe that they already know it, which makes them inattentive. And then lastly, even though in each project we focus on a single dimension of realizing gains from digital transformation efforts, across all of these, what generally comes out is that these are large organizational change efforts. And I think that this is reflected in a lot of your answers, where 50% of you said, digital transformation is really about rethinking how to do business. And what we've seen is that while a lot of digital transformation efforts, even when we think about it as rethinking how we do business, are seen as technical or technological in nature, a lot of the key barriers that organizations face are really the deep organizational ones, as with any change effort. And this leads to a few key things to think about. One is that rather than being led by a single team, whether that's the IT team or a special team that is tasked and siloed and tasked with a special expertise with a particular technology adoption effort, digital transformation efforts need to be pushed across the organization with alignment and buy-in across different teams and different departments. And we need to think carefully about how individuals within the company work with the technology and how you're going to design this process carefully in terms of who has decision rights, how are they going to interface with the technology so that you can realize the gains that can be had from it. And then finally, we need to think about complementary investments. It's not just about the key focal technologies that you're adopting for this digital transformation effort, but you need to make complementary investments across the business, whether it means hiring the right people or making other investments into technologies that will enable you to get the most out of your efforts. Okay, so now that we've set the scene a little bit, and hopefully you can have some of these ideas in the back of your mind as we dive into this panel discussion, I want to get into the meat of what we have for you today, which is to dive into the specifics of the challenges that organizations might face and how to address them. And I want to say a little bit about the wonderful speakers that we have with us today. So let's first start with Dominik. We have Dominik Krimpmann, who, as I said, is from Accenture, and he's a managing director who focuses on technology strategy. And he has a background in both computer science and business administration, and he's been working with many CEOs, CTOs, and CDOs across Fortune 500 companies to help them along their digital transformation efforts. And he's worked on more than 50 business and technology projects over the past decade, which we'll learn from today. And he's also shared these experiences via talks across conferences globally. We're also fortunate to have with us Sebastian Drews, who's the Chief Information Officer for Suse, which is the world's largest independent open source software company. Now, he leads the internal IT function to support company growth and its transformation efforts, and most recently has been leading its efforts to set up a new IT stack and the team and the organization across it. Now, before Suse, Sebastian served in multiple senior executive IT roles at Adidas, leading the development of its technology platform. Okay, so Dominik and Sebastian, I'm excited to start our conversation here today and engage with our audience about some of the questions that they might have. So Dominik, I'd love to start with you first, given your background working with many different companies on various digital transformation efforts. So can you give us a sense of the kind of work that you've done with different companies and some of the common challenges that you've seen along the way?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for having me, Hyunjin. I mean, the first thing that clients always ask is, Dominik, what do you mean when you say digital transformation? What does it mean for my organization? So I think one of the key first question is each and every organization needs to understand what they really refer to if they talk about digital transformation, because for some, and you had that in your data points, for some it is actually using a scanner and replacing paper with digital imagery. Yeah, for others it's actually, and you had that in another example, it's applying artificial intelligence. But if you look at those two examples, they are far left and far right of the continuum of what digital transformation can do. So therefore, I keep on starting with basically a terminology conversation that I typically kick off by saying digital transformation is applying technologies depending on whether it's actually older technologies or newer technologies, to your business processes and rethinking the way you do business today. And I really liked, our poll results there, that for most of the practitioners on this call is actually rethinking the way each individual organization is doing their business today. And that's actually the fundamental part of it. And what it then means for the organization, that's actually up to the decision makers within the organization, and also up to the risk level and this level of disruption that someone would like to apply to the organization. Because that's also one aspect, and you had a lot of data points already in the first 50 minutes, right? It's basically the way, how much can an organization consume in the way of changing the way they do their business, yeah? And there it also comes down to the executives to judge what is digestible for an organization, how many technologies can be applied, how much business process changes can be consumed from a change management perspective. So that's certainly how I look at it, meaning basically applying technology to the existing businesses, and that means all sorts of technologies. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Dominik. And I'd love to get Sebastian into the conversation here as well. It would be great if you could give us a little bit more background. For those of you in the audience that might not be familiar here, what does your company do? And then let's get into the digital transformation challenge that you both worked on together.
So thank you. I mean, that's actually a first great question, right? Suse's business is to support customers and clients and actually in their digital transformation journey through, in my own words, high-performing infrastructure solutions, right? So we are the leading provider for Linux enterprise grade operating systems, SUSE Linux Enterprise Server and Kubernetes management, both actually key to accelerate technical transformation journeys into the modern day and age. The challenge at SUSE, when I joined the company more than 2 years ago, was actually very specific, and you have already outlined that we are now the world's largest independent open source software company. But the challenge that we had ahead of us 2 years ago was we were just becoming independent. SUSE had been part of a different company by that time, a big software company from the UK, and had been bought out by a private equity firm to accelerate the business into a high growth journey. So we had to set up an own IT stack and function for SUSE and rethink the way we are running the business to become independent and to actually live up to the growth expectations that we had, to really transform the SUSE business into what we're starting to see now. And that was the challenge that I took on when I came on board. So back to the poll, we had to rethink how we were using technology to run our business, which is to sell support for open source software, for the world's leading open source software in Linux and Kubernetes management. But then also to really digitize whatever we can digitize to find efficiencies in our processes, because we knew that we had to do more with less. We were not able to run a large IT organization back in the day. SUSE is a mid-sized company at the moment, 2,000 plus employees globally. So we had to be able to run on our own feet, be smart about how we run the business to do more with less, and really find different ways to engage with our customers and our markets actually in positioning our products and actually positioning the SUSE expertise. That was our digital transformation journey 2 years ago when I started.
And
Great.
if I may chip in, right, because that's why when Sebastian and myself got to know each other, we were basically looking at their existing stack coming out of the parent organization with their business processes, which were sort of aged, not that much use of technology was applied, or newer technologies like automation or robotics process automation, or even to some extent actually using those kind of scanners or anything else in that regard. And we made a conscious decision, Sebastian, myself, and the involved parties and decision makers at that time, that while we had the chance to basically copy clone what was there from the parent company, we decided to basically replace, I would say, 80% of their existing technology stack with newer technologies, mostly software as a service platforms that come with automated processes, that come with a high level of standardization of those processes, but also with a high level of mobile interaction capabilities so that you can move the decision making even on your mobile devices. And we basically made that decision while saying to the business decision makers at that time, this will cause a lot of business process change to your organization. Are you actually up for that change? And they consciously made the decision, yes, we would like to do it because the upside is so great that we do think that we can basically come over those obstacles from an organizational transformation. And that was also one aspect of the Polo, one of your research results. I think it was point 3, where you basically link to the organization that then needs to live with that new technology stack, the digital transformation. So they
I'd love
made
to
that
follow up on this, actually. So here, like what you're outlining is that there were a lot of decisions that had to be made and you had to get organizational buy-in. And what I'd love to get a sense from both of you is, what were the real tough challenges here? You've described sort of what the digital transformation effort at Suse really looked like. And Dominik, you've helped us understand a little bit better, what were we talking about here? What kind of investment was Suse really ready to make? But, what were the really tough challenges that made this collaboration happen in the first place? Sebastian, as you said, you're a company that helps other companies with their innovation efforts. What was it about this particular digital transformation effort? Of course, moving an IT stack and completely changing it is a big effort. But what about that process were the key challenges that made it so difficult that, led you to bring in Accenture and led you to your collaboration?
Yeah, so the first key challenge that we had to work against was actually the timeline, because we were running the program against the clock due to contractual reasons, but also due to the huge strategic ambitions that Suse actually had back in the days, right? The earlier we would be independent, the faster we could accelerate the business and actually drive the development of our business model. The second key challenge, just very practically for us, was there was basically no IT organization back in the day when I started. I've been employee number 3 in IT. We're now close to 90 people. And as Dominik, I think you've outlined, right? We were rethinking how we run the business, how we run our end-to-end processes. And what I found important during that period was, in order to get to that stage, in order to execute a program like that, you need a partner that actually allows you to execute a program end-to-end across the full value chain, right? And there are not that many companies out there in the world that can run such a program, Accenture being one of them, of course. And Dominik, that's I think where you come in, because you had the ability to stuff a program with all its skills and capabilities across the full stack. You have the breadth and the depth of resourcing and the expertise on how to steer such a mammoth ship. That would be my summary of why we started collaborating together. Dominik, anything you would add?
Yeah, I would link to also the name of the tech talk here, how to basically measure and why do some of those digital transformation go wrong, right? I mean, we were, and Sebastian, you might remember that in the early days when we had that idea of rethinking the way Suse does its business, we were actually challenged by the decision makers. So how can we measure it? Yeah, how are you making sure that the investment you want to get from us, is actually paying off at a certain point in time? And what we defined was some sort of simple KPIs, and I think Hyunjin, you had it, I think it was point number 1, use simple KPIs or use simple data points instead of mass data points, right? So we agreed on, I think at that time it was 4 or 5 business KPIs that we looked at. Yeah, one was in in the sales area, one was in the procurement area, another one was in the way ideas become real products. And those KPIs we were basically watching over a period of that digital transformation when we were putting in all the different technologies, and we were measuring ourselves here and there of how process times have changed, how the behavior or the acknowledgement within the business using those new technologies have risen over a period of time. Those were all, you know, data points that we collected to make it measurable. But, and that's, I think, also another I think insight I would like to share is, it takes some time, right? You cannot expect these things to pay off within 3 months or something. You just have to believe that in the long run, it gives you enterprise agility, it reduces costs, it reduces maybe the amount of internal or external effort that you need to basically put on top of those business processes. That all takes a bit of time, and I typically say 1.5 to 2.5 years you just have to give yourself as an organization, and then you need to judge, but you need to align prior to embarking on that process on what are the simple data points you want to look at as KPIs, and not, you know, collecting mass data buckets, and then all of a sudden you don't really know where to look at.
I love this point that you're making, which is that, you know, not only are the returns to digital transformation hard to measure, which I think is part of the reason why a lot of businesses don't know if they're really getting returns from it, but these gains really take a lot of time to manifest. And, you know, I'd love to hear from you, you know, you both. Sebastian, you mentioned that, you know, one of the challenges was that you had to pull off this effort within a quick sort of time period. And I think this is a challenge that a lot of organizations find themselves in, which is that they have a short time period to make a great amount of changes. And yet you have to have commitment and alignment across the organization that, you know, you will see returns over time, that in the short run, a lot of these big investments are not going to emerge. So how did you guys tackle this, you know, in this instance? Do you have insights to share with the rest of our audience here?
So the starting point for our transformation effort actually was a full alignment of the executive team of Suse against the efforts. And Dominik, you've pointed to that, right? This wasn't an effort by the newly formed IT organization. This was the transformation the company had committed to run, with all the consequences. So all the C-level decision makers were fully on board in the first place. What we have seen, to be honest, was we have seen adoption challenges during running the transformation because of the short timeline. Processes had changed significantly, right? We have transformed processes to best of breed, best in class processes, based on what the SaaS solutions actually bring to us, right? We had scaled down the stack from more than 400 apps to 80 applications. So things were a lot simpler in a lot of areas in the end. And what we've seen is that when the adoption kicked in, when actually teams and people realized what the new stack offers, the simple things made a difference. As an example, within our new IT stack, we now have the ability to bring together all of the data that comes from our customer support organization. So one of the most important customer touch points our company has with everyone out there using our products, together with data from actually our business development teams. So that when a customer calls, we actually can see, all right, how does that customer request relate to potentially an outstanding opportunity that we are currently working on? And that, of course, helps to have a different lens on our customer relationships, right? It's these simple things, integrating data that was previously separated, that just pays off. And we haven't put a KPI to that, but people were really excited. I remember the first sales summit when we showcased our new go-to-market capabilities, Dominik, our CEO, Sander, by the time, I think he got raving reviews from the sales teams back in the days, because people were so happy about the simplified capabilities and the increase in data quality that we were delivering.
That's really great. So it sounds like in this case, you had alignment up front, but having these simple measures to track across the process really kept the alignment across the organization over time. Now, Dominik, I'm curious, you've seen a lot of digital transformation efforts. In a lot of cases, we don't have as fantastic a starting point as we might in Suse, where you have complete alignment. How do you get this alignment? Are there initiatives that have been useful or valuable that you found valuable across your experience?
I mean, I'm a big believer to pilots or MVPs, so minimal viable products, where we basically choose a specific area within an organization that typically has change agents of a digital transformation. So what do I mean with that? People that would love to embark on a digital transformation as the main stakeholders, or actually as the line manager that is actually of charge of the P&L of that certain business. If we can pick an area or a use case or some sort of business scenario in that specific area where the business person or the responsible manager stands behind the entire endeavor, we can sort of ring fence the area where we apply digital or the technologies and the digital transformation. And then we can quite quickly show what it actually means to the organization in that area, but also honestly saying to the P&L or to the cost, profile or revenue profile of that specific areas. That typically is something that I suggest to my clients if they don't want to yet embark on such a transformation as Suse has done it, right? I mean, yes, that is a specific example because we basically transformed the entire organization at that time. But if you have, organizations that want to do smaller steps or not yet convinced completely about it, then pilots or MVPs are certainly something that I continuously suggest to do, because it also, frames a bit or restricts a bit the required capital for it, because that's also always a bit of a threshold, right? If we talk digital transformation, again, linking back to that rethinking the way we do business, that typically comes with quite an extensive request for CapEx and OpEx as a one-off investment. And organizations that haven't yet mentally embarked on that journey, they like to be, taken smaller steps, and that's where, as I said, MVPs or pilots can do a great deal. And then with those results, and honestly saying, not always the pilots work, right? But that's then also something that tells you something, and not very seldom, it's actually the adaptability of an organization to that MVP, to that pilot, that sort of stops the digital transformation kicking into that area. But that's then also an outcome out of that MVP pilot thing. But it's typically a very good start for an organization that hasn't yet mentally embarked on that digital transformation journey.
That's great. I mean, it's really about getting quick wins in some ways early on to get more buy-in. Now, I'm curious.
To show the results, right, quite quickly. However, also linking to what we just said before, then once you are embarking then on the overall digital transformation, you need to give yourself a bit of time, right? You cannot continuously, deliver within sprints of 3 months P&L impact. That's not going to happen.
Exactly. That was actually exactly what I was going to follow up on here, which is that, inevitably you might have some quick wins, but once you start embarking on this effort, you're not always going to continue to see returns. And I'm sure you saw that too, Sebastian, at Suse. So what were things that you did throughout the efforts? Because these transformations, not just the returns, but the transformations themselves take quite a bit of time. So how do you keep up and know that you're going on the right trajectory? Are there initiatives that you found particularly valuable throughout this process? Especially when you see some of those simple data metrics potentially not looking great in the right direction that you would hopefully want to see the entire time.
So one thing that we keep doing on an ongoing basis within Suse, right? We aim to keep our eyes on the ball, I would call it, and we run a constant stream of enablement and communication work. Implementing an application or launching a platform is actually not when a project is done, right? The project is done when the adoption has taken place, when the culture in a part of the business has actually changed to make use of the new capabilities and features, and the ways of working have adopted. That's one thing that we do on an ongoing basis, specifically when it comes to data or, for instance, end user computing capabilities. What I find, however, interesting in these discussions, right? I mean, I look at digital transformations, returns on investment, even a bit on a broader scale, right? And I do think that, yes, you will see KPIs that visualize process efficiency. That, I mean, you can measure how much more efficient it is to run an application based on Kubernetes after you've containerized it compared to a non-modern IT infrastructure design, right? And that's bare money. But I look at this even from a more strategic perspective, because only through a modern IT infrastructure, only through a modern IT stack, will companies gain the ability to drive their strategy and to create the agility that they need to respond actually to changes in markets, to changes in customer needs, etc. A good example maybe in our case was we had the opportunity actually to open a new go-to-market channel for our business. We had the opportunity to partner with SAP, one of the biggest partnerships Suse has. We have a long partnership for co-innovation. And we had the opportunity to actually sell software subscriptions through the app marketplace that SAP offers. Through the simplified stack, through the simplified processes that we had put in place, we were able to do that work within a few weeks. Had we tried to execute that in the previous stack that Suse was running on, it would have taken half a year if it would have worked at all, right? So these are no things you can measure, but I think, Dominik, you called it strategic agility. That is actually where the power of a digital platform comes in, of the power of a simplified digital infrastructure, a modern Kubernetes-driven cloud infrastructure as an example. And that's something you have to measure beyond the KPIs.
Great. I think this idea of strategic agility is increasingly an important one, not just in terms of technological capabilities, but of course, I think one that we're seeing throughout this pandemic in terms of being able to change and adapt to the larger external environment. Were there things in the process where you faced unexpected challenges or had to grow in terms of this strategic agility that in places that you didn't anticipate?
So I can start maybe, Dominik, and I'll hand over to you, but we had more than one challenge, right? The most obvious one was the pandemic hit us, right? Nobody expected that. But of course, that put a large change into the transformation program that we were running. How do you collaborate across 6-7 locations globally, where actually just our project team was actually coming from? How do you keep people close to each other while they are so distant from each other? You can only bridge that distance through digital. So our digital workplace became extremely important. Right, we were just joking around about Zoom and Teams before the meeting, collaboration platforms that allow workshops virtually. That became really important unexpectedly, I have to say. How do you run a user acceptance test where you don't have everybody in the same room, as an example? The other element that I think played a key role in our transformation journey that always came up was moving to a state-of-the-art technology stack comes with a dramatic need to simplify and rethink your business processes. And that change is hard. It comes with consequences. You have to do things differently in the future than you have done them in the past. And that led to a few discussions. Sometimes in our case, the changes were dictated by the capabilities of the platform we were implementing. Some of our products were actually not covering all of the specific requests or needs Suse had for good reasons. So we had to rethink processes even a bit beyond what we were anticipating. these would be the two things that can come into my mind, Dominik, when it comes to obstacles. What else from your end?
Yeah, couldn't agree more, as we have both embarked on that journey. I think let me put in a couple of nuances to your second point, which is basically, in my words, it's these platforms. If you aim for digital transformation, you make use of those standard platforms. They typically come with 80% of the business specifics, to be covered, and for 20%. You here and there, like Sebastian was saying, you just need to make bold decisions. The business stakeholders need to make bold decisions, because here and there it would mean for a specific country, certain products cannot be launched like they were launched before, because the standard capabilities of the platform doesn't support it, or you need to do it manually. You just have to, you have to believe in this. Standardization drives business agility of my organization, and therefore I make a conscious decision of not covering those 20%, or I have to cover it manually, which comes with inefficiencies to business process operations. But those tough decisions you have to do along the journey, and you have to do them more than once, I can tell you. And it's always coming together with the same group of people that has initially made the conscious decision on embarking on the digital transformation, that have given themselves the KPIs to watch out and to trace, basically, and therefore let themselves being judged on the success, but then also making the conscious decision that those 20% need to be covered off by something else, because it would go against what the digital transformation is aiming for, which is standardization, automation, and agility for the business.
Okay, great. I know that we have a bunch of questions here that we're going to turn to very soon. But before we do, I'd love to get your thoughts on what was the impact of this digital transformation effort that you embarked on. Now it's taken some time. We've talked a lot about what the challenges were and what some of the solutions might have been. What was the impact on the business, and also in terms of the shift across these business processes that you talked about, Sebastian, and maybe even in terms of the capabilities like we've been talking about with strategic agility. Can you give us a little bit more of a sense of what the impacts were?
Yes, so I would say the most visible impact, if I look at the outcome of our efforts in the very end, right? Suse has just achieved a major milestone in its corporate development. We had our IPO actually in May this year. And prior to that, we had actually made our first acquisition, Rancher Labs, the leading Kubernetes platform provider in the world, right? And we were only able to achieve these milestones because we had gone through the efforts, Dominik, to establish a simplified IT backbone to actually make the company stand alone in record time, to be very honest. So I think the IT transformation, the digital transformation that we jointly in Suse have actually driven, right, together with Accenture, has laid the foundation for that. That would be my very broad stroke. And through that, we are actually able to help even more customers be successful with open source software, as simple as it gets, right? Dominik, anything you would highlight maybe with regards to specific processes that we've tackled, any specific outcome?
Yeah, I think what I always recall is the sales effectiveness. Yeah, you mentioned just the occasion we had in the past when we were stepping in front of the sales force of the human sales force of Suse, because they were fascinated by the way they could basically document and handle their lead to order processes, right? We do have seen significant process cycle time increases when it comes to approvals within the internal organization, because that can be completely done mobile enabled, or in certain areas being done mobile enabled. So those are two other business KPIs that I recall. And when we were basically agreeing, I mean, Sebastian said another time that opening a whole new sales channel, right? That's, to be honest, we didn't even have that on our KPI dashboard at that time, but that's just something which really tells you what business agility then means, because that is adapting your organization, your business, to something which you haven't known before, right? I mean, that's agility. And Sebastian was stating the acquisition of Ranger. That's certainly something as well to quote on that.
One thing I would add, actually, and that is actually just materializing now, right? We talked quite a bit about the simplified processes, the integrations, and also how integrated the stack is when it comes to data. And actually, the ability to drive a data driven culture transformation, right? To make data actually the core of all decisions. I think that is what we are starting to embark on at the moment, or even more, to be honest. And we're just discovering really the power of all the data that we have now, the cleaner data that we have now, and how integrated it is, right? And that's something we didn't have before. I mentioned one example actually related to our sales and customer support data, but we see that on a lot more angles. And I mean, we are now in that situation that's 2 years after we've started the journey. Coming back to what Dominik said, you reap the benefits actually quite far down the road after these investments.
I think that this is a really great point to open up to some of the questions here. Ending at this point where you say 2 years later, you're really seeing this cultural shift come about. Now, I see across a lot of different questions, this idea around, how do you actually think about, building some of the organizational capabilities in terms of the people within the organization, like, whether this means making sure that the leaders are equipped to lead this transformation and have those capabilities, or in terms of across the organization, if you have the right people in order to make this a success. Did you lose anyone, and how did you build up these capabilities over time?
So from my perspective, spot on, great question in the first place. Digital transformation is a team sport, right? It's not an initiative IT drives, it's a company transformation through digital technology. So we've spent a lot of time to actually bring our business functions and business leaders along the way. And if I reflect on the transformation, the functions where we had the strongest business ownership have been the functions that have reaped the most benefits. Right, there are always differences in how engaged a certain business function is versus how much time a different leader can actually spend on a topic. The areas where we had most attention from the C-level decision makers, from the executives actually working in the program, leading the program together with Accenture, were the functions we were most successful with. And maybe worth to say also, we had embedded the program fully in the organization. So the execution methodology was agile-ish, I would call it, right? We didn't differentiate between the business and IT, Dominik. We had integrated work streams responsible for a certain capability set or value delivery. And I think that's basically where we had the biggest impact. Of course, we had a few cases where things didn't go as expected, to be honest. Yes, a few people haven't followed us on the journey, but I think that's really the clear exception from my perspective.
Dominik, can you speak a little bit also about the role of the consultants? When did you step in versus, really allowing the organization to build the capabilities from the ground up?
Well, I do think where consultants always can be beneficial, right? Speaking of my own job profile, is to rethink the way things are being done at the moment, right? And that was what we did in the very early beginning when we figured out that the existing technology stack and the existing processes are very manually being operated. A lot of manual tooling, a lot of customized tooling was in place, where we then looked at it and said, hold on a minute, what if we rethink this completely, and under the assumptions that we do get approval for the investment to be done. So I think this out-of-the-box thinking on a status quo, that's where certainly externals like ourselves, but also others, can help making a difference. And then, as part of the organizational change that Sebastian was outlining, right, I do think that's a second element, right? Not only igniting the digital transformation, but also then helping to basically hand it properly over to the organization that then needs to operate it on a day-to-day basis. And that let me make that point, that because that's also a big belief of myself, at least subjectively. A digital transformation can only be executed by the organization itself with some help like ourselves, but at a certain point in time, and typically also these 1.5, 2.5 years down the road, it needs to be completely inherited by the existing organization. So consultants should move on to the next challenge, and the business processes need to be completely acknowledged and being lived by the organization. Otherwise, you basically will sort of operate in an artificial world, and cost-wise, it will not make any sense, because external consultants compared to internal labor, typically in a steady state, business as usual estate, doesn't make much sense.
Great. Now, one of the questions that's coming up here is really around organizational alignment. Now, we've talked a lot about some of the key initiatives that you both worked on in terms of getting alignment, whether that's tracking these simple data points, making sure that the C-level suite is paying differential attention to the key units that matter, and getting these pilots off the ground to get initial some of the quick wins. One of the things that came up here was about change agents, in terms of getting, moving these change efforts forward, and also ensuring that you have alignment. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of, what they do, what level at which they should be in terms of being very effective, and what you found to be very valuable from the process?
Sebastian, you want to go first?
After you, Dominik.
So, I mean, the first thing, how to identify, the first thing is they make themselves being identifiable. Yeah. So I would not look at it generally from a level point of view, but I come to that dimension in a second. First and foremost, take the ones that voluntarily mention themselves or step up. Yeah, because that's typically intrinsically driven change management. Yeah, so they basically love the way they love the change. They want to be a change agent. Yeah, and they basically spread good words around the initiative. And then the second thing is, if you ask me now, but it's live now, I would take a mid-level sort of. If you ask for a level, I would take mid-level. So still a link to operations, because that's very, very beneficial to convince the mass of the organization to adapt to the new processes. But on top of the mid-level management, you always need some sort of senior leadership sponsorship on top, so that the mid-level gets also support in certain challenging situations. But first and foremost, I think take everyone you can get. Yeah, because that's a given, and that's should be taken like a present. Yeah.
I have a very practical example related to that. So, as part of our roadmap, we have just actually finalized another milestone, which was to put in place a brand new digital collaboration platform for everyone in Suse. And we have actually recruited, I think, more than 50 change agents for that implementation across all regions, across all the different teams. I mean, just as a background, Suse has a very wide spread of user profiles, very technical users working in the open source communities, right? That's where the core of our product lies. But also, of course, executives that communicate mostly via mobiles, or actually people working in the field, driving sales for the organization. So from my perspective, these 50 people that have been coming from the mid-management in many cases, but also the people that actually work hands-on, has been instrumental for actually driving adoption of our new platform. We wouldn't have landed the change in the ways of working. We wouldn't have unleashed the power of the platform if these people wouldn't have been involved. And in many cases, they are actually coming up with ideas on how to evolve the overall platform for everyone in the company, So that's one of the best things I've seen, and that's actually truly what we call the power of many. That's the core belief of everything we do in open source, right?
I love that in terms of aligning, what we're talking about here with exactly, I think, the purpose behind Suse. Now, I know there's tons of questions here, and I can't believe we're already at the end of our session. So I want to end with a last question for you, which I think is an important question that we haven't really dived too much into in terms of process. As you embark on this, one of the things that we talked about was that early on, you want to get some quick wins, maybe start with some pilots. But to what extent do you see this as a bottom-up versus a top-down process? And do you see that, and have you found that having a detailed roadmap is useful, or that you should really remain agile throughout it all without a very clear roadmap in mind?
I can start. It's actually a fascinating topic. I just had discussed it with Dominik and team at a different occasion. So even running a project agile means that you need to have a plan, number one. And we also had a plan, but we took the liberty to change the plan whenever required. I've learned a good sentence about that, right? You need to have a clear North Star that you are running against, that you're executing against. For us, it was make the company independent after 18 months on a state-of-the-art IT stack. But you need to have the ability and also the will to change the tactics whenever required. So we changed the tactics more than once. We shifted go lives. We were not ready. We decided on Monday to not go live on Friday, but actually to go live a month after. We have pulled go lives forward because we had actually teams that were executing tremendously, and they actually helped us finish the overall roadmap earlier. So we had, I think, the leadership and the relationships in the full executive team, also with Accenture, to take these decisions fast. Executing a project agile also means high velocity decision making, right? So you can't run, you can't let the teams run independently and say, you are agile, go ahead. You as leaders have to take decisions fast whenever they are required. And you need to be bold sometimes and take calculated risks. That would be my 2 cents, Dominik.
Dominik, any last word from you before we wrap up here?
No, I think Sebastian phrased it very, very well. And as we have both embarked on that journey together, I think well phrased, and I think very helpful for the audience here.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think it's very clear that we could have many more conversations around this without covering all of the possible challenges that could come up. Dominik and Sebastian, thank you so much for sharing your insights. It has been fantastic for me to engage in this conversation with you. And thank you, everyone, for joining and for all of the questions. These are fantastic questions, and I really wish we had more time to discuss all of them in detail. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.